We have a very strong emphasis on experiential education. So I would say, trying to be as objective as we can. I think we're a real leader kind of globally on that.
I'm Glenn Herbert, and I'm an editor with Our Kids. We're speaking with insiders from Canada's leading private schools to gain insights into their programs, culture, traditions, and leadership. This includes insights from parents, alumni, and administrators. This is the Our Kids Insider Perspective.
Here are a couple things that spring to mind for me. I actually am educated as an engineer, not as a teacher of all things. But I've spent my whole career in education, first at the post-secondary level at a university, and then the second half in two independent schools, most recently Appleby. And I guess one of the reasons that I love my work is because I have lots of friends have been incredibly successful in a wide range of things. And many of them talk about missing a sense of purpose in what they do. And I have this passion, this interest, this focus that education is probably the greatest driver of societal well-being that we have, whether that's economic or health-wise or culture or just being a civil society. And so when Appleby was founded 110 years ago, the founders of the school, a guy named Sir Edmund Walker and his son-in-law, John Guest, really talked about the school as a driver for improving society, for creating leaders for the nation. At that time, it was like 30 kids in one room here in Oakville. And so I find great energy from doing something tied to trying to make society a better place, not just the kids we're educating day to day, but also as a focus for what's going on. And that sense of purpose would be one thing. The second, and I suspect everyone you've talked to would say something like this, is I'm really energized by interactions with people. And we're really fortunate that whether it's our students, our teachers, our staff, our parents, our alumni, I find when I come to school of a day, I can always speak to people who are actually going to put me in a really good mood. Like they're happy, they're motivated. Those interactions make me feel good as I go about my day doing one thing to the next. And I'm a people person, and I love that interactivity or interaction. And so I would say that would be the second piece that's I find great joy from. And I think the third would be variety. So I get to travel around the world through work, whether it's because of associations we're involved in or because of work with parents or alumni or some school programs. And every day looks a little bit different for me, whether it's what I'm doing on campus or the travel or other elements. And we have a campus up in Temagami. We have a huge outdoor education program. And, the fact I might spend 3 hours hiking into our island across Lake Temagami in winter or canoeing. And, that's a great change from stuff I might be doing on campus or a trip the following week. So that variety would be the third thing that I find really energizing and positive. Well, I knew really one person at the school when I came here. And so, the sage advice all principals or heads of school are told is try to understand the nature of the place when you first get there. Don't try to make any changes right away. Try to understand what's going on. And listen, I knew the campus here is spectacular. I know you've driven by it a number of times, and we're very lucky. It's arguably the most beautiful campus in the country, I think. And so I knew about the campus being lovely. I knew the programs were really strong, but what I wasn't ready for was how happy the people were, so our students and our faculty. And I just found that the culture of the place was not something I was expecting, because the program's relatively challenging. I mean, we challenge our kids a fair bit, and sometimes there's a tension between school culture and program challenge. That it can be too hard driving. For some reason, that balance between having something that's challenging and pushes kids, but also having a really happy environment was something that I wasn't ready for. And so job one was trying to figure out where we take the school and what needs to be improved upon. For me, that was all based on understanding the place. So my first 6 months was really about doing that, because I was fortunate to step into a job where my predecessor had done a fabulous job. And my colleagues, both on the leadership team, but across the entire employee team, are really fabulous. And so I wasn't forced to do anything prematurely. So that was, that was a great benefit for me. I'm not sure there is a typical day. So whether it's going off, I mentioned going to Temagami and spending a few days up there with one of our grade 9 or grade 10 classes, that obviously looks different than what could be a day here. I think some of the things that I spend a fair bit of time on, I try to most mornings get out and greet our students who are being dropped off in the morning. And Appleby is interesting. We have about a third of our students are boarding students, and about two-thirds are day students from the Western GTA through to Hamilton. And so obviously morning is busy times. And I know that in primary schools, there's often the head of schools out there doing that, but in high schools, it's not as typical. And I just find saying hi to my colleagues as they arrive and our students as they arrive as being, once again, a way that a smile gets thrown on my face very quickly. As far as other things that go on in the day, there's lots of administrative work. So whether it's talking to my colleagues, committee meetings, so whether it's working with board committees, whether it's talking to donors, or working on facilities projects or admissions or finance pieces, there's lots of that kind of work. I do try to take a fair bit of time with students. So as I mentioned, I'm not a teacher, so I'm not teaching any courses, but whether it's going to arts events or athletic events, or I try to have lunch with groups of students on a pretty regular basis. So I'll host pizza lunches when we're not in COVID zone, and just use that as an opportunity to talk to our students as far as what they're liking about school, what they're not liking about school, how do we make the place better. And once again, boy, there's a lot of really good ideas there. So it's a blend. I think every week looks different. Some may be more governance focused, some may be programmatically focused, some may be traveling. As I mentioned, I travel a fair bit for work as well. And being able to see the world and meet Appleby people all over the world, knowing that every one of their backgrounds and perspectives and experiences look different too. Boy, that keeps opening my mind, stretching my mind. In some ways, there's a typical journey, and in some ways, every journey is very customized to the student. So there are a couple of broad philosophical approaches that we have here that I think probably are important to point out as far as those journeys. So we go grade 7 to grade 12 here at Appleby. We have a very strong emphasis on experiential education. So I would say, trying to be as objective as we can. I think we're a real leader kind of globally on that. The blend here that we're trying to do is have this kind of commitment to high quality or excellence at the same time as breadth of experience. So the tough thing here is if there's a student who's going to be an Olympic caliber X, and they need to put in 30 hours a week to get there, this is probably not the right place for them. So part of what we do is kind of force a breadth of experience. So, the curriculum is deliberately broad, and then students are able to start to specialize a little bit in grade 10, more in grade 11, more in grade 12. So there's a broad experience there. My own view is from a developmental standpoint, those really interesting years from about 12, 13 to 15, kids go through wild changes. Their brains start to rewire developmentally, how they interact with others. Physically, they're changing. There's hormones going on. So you've got this grade 8, grade 9, grade 10 period where there's lots of change kind of going on there. So part of our view is that stability, that consistency of experience is important because it allows kids not only the curricular front, but especially on the co-curricular front. And here it's, co-curriculars are mandatory every single term. So you're going to have 3 co-curriculars, 1 for each term, and 1 or 2 club experiences on top of that. So that could be arts, athletics, service, a wide variety of things. And kids have to do that all the way through to grade 12. We require them to have a minimum number of athletics. Same thing on arts and service. So even if you're a jock, you've got to do something in the arts area. If you're someone who's really passionate about kind of more academically oriented things, you got to do a sport. And so part of that is giving people taste for things. I certainly find, I'm 56. The things that I was convinced I loved when I was 12 were not the same things as when I was 18 or 24 or 40. And so part of this is giving people a broad literacy and experiences and allowing them at least to try things, not just allowing them, requiring them to try things. So they have lots and lots of selection within the broad categories, because we do think part of that breadth of experience becomes powerful for later in life as people become more interested, whether it's, history or whether it's, performance. And by forcing some of those challenging assumptions, or challenging some of those assumptions, we actually think it's quite good. And at the same time, we have, I think a high quality enough program that if you're really passionate about drama or singing or rugby, the caliber of the program is strong enough, or mathematics, you can actually go and pursue that at a really high level. So finding that balance between excellence and breadth is kind of important. In the younger years, it's much more on the breadth front, and you have less choice. As the kids get older, there's a higher degree of choice. At the same time, so I'm rambling on a little bit here, but I hope you're getting what I'm saying. The experiential elements are really important for us. So outdoor ed would be an example. In grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, there's mandatory outdoor education elements. For 9 and 10, they happen up at our campus in Temagami. Grade 9's a canoe trip with the initial advising group. So the group of, let's say, 7 or 8 kids with their teacher and a guide. In grade 10, it's a winter camping experience where they're sleeping out in a quinzhee, like an igloo kind of thing, for 3 days off in the bush. In grade 8 and grade 7, obviously it's a much less challenging kind of experience. So the challenge grows with grade level. As well, a couple of years ago, we put in a policy because global education has been what we see as a really central part of experiences for kids as they're developing kind of global citizenship and appreciation for being able to live and work with people of all sorts of different backgrounds and appreciating different cultures. So that's grown significantly over about 15 years. 2 years ago, we actually made that a mandatory part of the program. So whether that's a service trip, whether that's an intercultural trip, an academic exchange, an international conference, every student who goes to Appleby will have a global experience via Appleby. Now, obviously, in the higher years, that becomes a more significant part of the program. While there are opportunities for younger kids, you see more of those certainly at the higher level. Probably the most significant experiential piece that people would note, and it's unique to us, is our boarding program. So we have boarders mainly internationally, but some from Canada in grade 9, grade 10, and grade 11. What's unique at Appleby is in grade 12, everyone's got to go into boarding. So I have a house on campus. My youngest son went through Appleby. He actually had to move about 300 meters and live his life as a boarder in grade 12. And part of that is because I think these days there's so much comfort and support by families. That's a wonderful thing. But when you talk to parents and kids, often their greatest fear is what's going to happen when they leave home, when they go off to university. And so what we've created is this kind of half step. So they go and they live in residence. They're getting used to doing their laundry or living with a roommate, although we have lots of single rooms as well, getting up for meals. And boy, that's such a powerful experience. And it's a very safe experience as that half step to university. And boy, does that grade 12 class bond, unlike what they did in grade 11 or grade 10 or grade 9. So you see this, younger years tends to be more nurturing, more supportive, more structured, and then you kind of have more experiences and a broadening as the kids get older and then eventually graduate after grade 12. So that experiential element, I think, is really, really key. And obviously even things like sports, and you'll find this at all schools. The younger years, the premium is on participation and everyone playing. And obviously with that excellence piece, it becomes more competitive kind of more based on, how are we going to do well, in addition to having some participation, but the balance of those things evolves through time, which I think is very age appropriate, and really that range of experiences is what we're trying to do here. Staff turnover this year is a bit higher than usual, but last year it was very low. So we have typically, let's say, about 4% turnover a year, kind of ballpark, and it goes higher or lower. I think our HR approach is really, really good, because we look at trying to develop teachers to become better is probably not the right word, but to keep expanding their horizons and go in different directions. And so, we put an immense amount into PD here. We also have a leadership model for faculty, where we don't appoint someone to be, let's say, the head of department forever. They have a term, and there's a sunset clause on that. So we have people moving around doing lots of different kind of roles from a leadership standpoint. In my opinion, but I think actually the most powerful, of course, subject-specific knowledge is important. But what's far more important is the caliber of relationships. If I look at my own life, and I had some years I was a very good student. I had some years where I had lots of challenges and lots of troubles. And I looked at the relationships with my peers and with my teachers as being the most defining aspect of my education as I look back at it in retrospect. And so part of the craft of teaching, of the vocation, of the calling of teaching, is around how do you actually have those relationships as being powerful, being trusting and enduring, so that the faculty connect with our students. So we've got lots of PhDs, we have people who know their subject areas, importantly, but I think what's more important is that relationship piece, where we spend a lot of time on trying to foster that. And that's the kind of thing that stays with you for a lifetime, whether it's, we talked about a former colleague of yours. I mean, those are the things that kind of stick with you. So actually, we're quite happy with the caliber of what we have here. We would be considered to be more proactive on our development management of our employees than probably most of education is. And I think that's to the advantage of the employees and certainly to the students. I mentioned a little while before about this tension between what's success looked at the short term, to the lens of the short term versus the long term. And I think a school's got to kind of deliver on both. So in the short term, you always hear there's discussions around resume strengths and eulogy strengths. And it's really got to be a combination of two things. So giving people the capacity to be successful, to do well. And we have lots of our graduates, I think, of faculty members as well, students, who are really exceptional. They get high marks. They're great teammates. They're exceptional at one pursuit or another, and lots of alumni. I won't list all that. But at the same time, you need people to have those virtues that will, I mentioned, have a meaningful life, but actually contribute to society and the community. So I look at things like kind of empathy, compassion. I mentioned being a good teammate. Those people who are committed to principles of justice and who see some of their calling as being, how do I make my community a better place, however you define community, whether it's local or national or international. And so if I can think of a faculty member I work with here who actually balances those things perfectly, who is beloved because he shows all of those character traits that allow you to look up to them. They become a role model. But at the same time, he's done really well as far as delivering on the kind of core business. So in my view, through the lens of a 50-year-old or an 80-year-old, those people who've lived the values of Appleby combine both of those things. They're able to be successful in a traditional sense of the word, but at the same time, they have that deeper sense of calling, that deeper sense of purpose, whether it's to family, to community, or to nation. And there are lots of examples of that. And I think any great education or school, whether it's public or private, whether it's in Canada or somewhere else, has got to deliver on those two things together. One of the realities I found when I came to Appleby is the school's been through immense changes. So, if you go back and look at the history of the school, we were this tiny place, all boys, predominantly boarding, if not entirely boarding. And it was very much a B-level school, not particularly academically strong, didn't actually have a lot of competitive athletics. And that kind of went through some changes in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And then in the late 90s, we went co-ed. And I think the game got elevated more as far as some of the experiential elements. So when you speak to alumni, and one of the things I love about my job is speaking to alumni of different eras and asking them their own reflections on their experience. One of the realities of doing alumni work is most people tend to lock a place in time from the moment they left Germany. They don't always appreciate how much things have evolved. And what's clear to me is different generations of alumni had profoundly different experiences here. So we have alumni coming back to that. We have alumni involved with mentoring programs. Just on Friday, we had something called the Alumni Leaders Forum. So once a year, we bring back, I think on Friday, we had 70 alumni all on Zoom, where he talked about a series of strategy questions facing the school. And so we see alumni as being helpful in kind of three major ways. One is they can help our students or our younger alumni very directly as mentors, as people who can lend a hand to them. Number two, of course, alumni can help us as donors, as people who can support the school in a philanthropic way, and that's really important. The great schools of the world have a strong sense of community and support in that way. And the third way they can help us is in terms of counsel and guidance. And so I look at alumni as a kind of conduit between the school, and often schools see themselves in bubbles, and what's going out in the rest of the world. So to give us that kind of insight as far as here's what workplaces are looking for, here's what communities need, and to challenge us a little bit to think from different perspectives than the classic just education perspective. So we're really happy, and our alumni, I think, are very committed to the school, and I think it's one of the great areas of strength, despite the fact those experiences look very, very different. Some are from the 60s versus someone who graduated 5 years ago. I think one of the great myths or fallacies that families looking at schools look towards is the campus and the facilities piece. And as a result, you found that many schools around the world, this is a global phenomena, get involved with these arms races around facilities. We have a spectacular campus, and actually our facilities in the last 5 years have actually been ramped up. So our facilities are lovely. And I think a lot of people think about Appleby because they drive by and see this beautiful place, or they come for a tour and go, wow, this is amazing. But of course, that's the wrong reason why you should pick a school. So when we talk to people, we really say fit is important. And for us, we want someone who has the capacity and the capability to be involved and be successful in a fairly high-end academic program, but also that broad range of co-curricular experiences. So as a baseline, we need people who are able to do that. I think what's most important, though, is their willingness to try new things. Having a natural curiosity, a natural sense of, I'm happy to be challenged. I care about the other people. I want to create a sense of belonging, not only for myself, but for the people around us. So it's more to do with attitude. So long as I meet the baseline as far as capability, the attitude piece and the willingness to try new things are what I think is most important. Yeah, there's a quote, I'm not going to get it right, a Galileo quote saying something, I'm paraphrasing it, saying, it's not about instructing someone in the answers. It's about them discovering what they can do inside. And that's clearly the case, right? I mean, you've talked about your own journey. I think of my journey. It wasn't about any knowledge that was imparted. It was about developing an understanding of who you are, appreciating your own strengths, and getting some kind of a sense of the impact you can have on yourself and on others. It's advanced placement economics is just a vehicle for that, or the soccer team is just a vehicle for that. It's really about human development and self-awareness. I think there are a couple types of students, probably this wouldn't be the right place. I mean, there's some for whom if the challenge is overwhelming, and we have a very supportive environment, we have student support center. We have a lot of people who assist our students. as they're going through their own journey. But for some kids, this would be a bridge too far. And, that's, what we're interested in is putting a child in the position to be successful. So there's a category like that. I think people who are really focused on high degree of specialization early in life, if someone's committed to, I use the example of being an Olympic caliber fencer, let's say, and they need to do that for 30 hours a week, that's going to be problematic as far as the breadth of experience we're asking of kids here. And I think part of it is an openness to other people and people of different backgrounds, and this notion of being a kind of a global citizen. So there's an attitude piece there. So, but my experience has been most young people I run into, they don't fall into those profiles. I'm a huge fan of this younger generation, and I think they tend to be more principled than mine was, more creative, and more interested in trying different things and getting outside of the railroad tracks. So the vast majority of young people I see, whether they come to Appleby or not, I'm a big fan of theirs. I think it's a really positive culture. I talked about relationships before. To me, if you're going to get one thing right, it's the most important thing to get right is not whether you're IB or AP or whether you have this team or not. It's actually the relationship piece between peers and between teachers and students. And I think that's really quite exceptional here. Listen, if you think back to when we were teenagers, almost all of us had a bumpy ride going through adolescence and being a teenager. I know very few people had a smooth ride. So that's the same case with young people today. So if you can have people who are helping guide them and giving them experiences as far as program, but more important than that, culture, then I think you're actually setting them up for all those things we talk about for success later on. And so part of that is creating a sense of belonging, having some adults, trusted adults to whom a student feels they can turn. A good friend of mine with whom I worked for years and years, who I worked for, talked about, every child needing a third parent. Of course, that's a nuclear family way of looking at it, but there comes a time where there are things you're not going to speak to your own parents about, especially in teenage years. So you need to find people who can be coaches and guides in that. So I think we have a very inclusive community. We have kids from 50 different countries here, pretty broad range of diversity, and part of the mix, that's very powerful. But how you get people to work well and effectively together, I think we do quite well at that. So that inclusivity, which is a huge subject these days, I think is an area of strength for us. But the culture piece, I think, is around encouraging trying new things. If I go back and look at 30 years ago or 40 years ago versus today, the range of things that are considered cool to excel at has become much broader. So you can be a great person on this service project, or great at fine art, or great at soccer. And all those things are seen as being really cool. If you go back to when I was a kid in schools, I didn't go to Appleby, but for guys, the jocks tended to be the cool thing you needed to be. Being a 95% student wasn't always seen as cool. The definition of what's cool is very broad here now, and I think that's powerful. I have two sisters-in-law who are teachers in the public system, one in Durham and one in Peel. And over the years, you've always talked about, whether they'd have an interest in working in independent schools. And I think one of the presumptions or one of the assumptions is that there's tension point between students, between parents and between teachers. And it's tough on teachers. Listen, my experience here has been really remarkable, and it was a bit of a surprise. So I have found our parents to be extraordinarily supportive of the school, being on a very similar wavelength to the school, to faculty, in terms of, what makes a lot of sense for their students. And so, the last 18 months with COVID have been really challenging, and we haven't been able to deliver on 100% of what typically Appleby provides. And a lot of people would have headed into that saying, oh my goodness, we're going to be in lots of trouble. And I found exactly the opposite. The degree of goodwill in the community has been really unbelievably strong. And I can think of having had maybe 3 negative conversations with parents in the last 18 months, and all of those ended up being fine by the end of the conversations. That's unbelievable, because what we do have is parents who are very invested in their children's having positive experiences in the best sense of that. And of course, different parents have different views. We have lots of international parents in our community, but we found kind of very positive approach. Part of that is we're saying, here's what our philosophy is all about. And, you've got to expect bumps in the roads. And the issue is not avoiding the bumps. Some families kind of are trying to take the bumps out of the road for the kids. That's not the point. The point is actually helping the children get over the bumps, right? And helping them own some of that. And so we really talk about that philosophically as being important. And I think we found that works quite well. That doesn't mean once in a while we don't have some real challenges and disagreement. Of course you do. Every school does. But generally speaking, the norm is quite the opposite. It's been very positive. We have something called the mutual respect program or process. So, if something's way off on a extreme end, that deals with significant discipline kinds of issues. But most of the conflicts we're dealing with are not in that kind of zone. So the principles of the mutual respect process or policy are, how do you actually engage people in mediated conversations, as an example, to try to have them work their way through. If someone's really been at fault, it may turn into kind of a restorative justice kind of model, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is have young people solve conflicts with other young people in a reasonable, rational way, where they take responsibility, take ownership, and then find a way to move forward with those students, with those people with whom they've been in conflict, on a reasonable, cooperative way. They may not be best friends, but can they be in a class together? Can they be in tomography together? Can they be on a team together? So we use the mutual respect process a great deal. Once again, there are extremes where, discipline is important, but generally that's how and it works quite well. So it's probably a combination of a few things, right? And I'm a function of my own age, my own elderly age here. I heard a quote about leadership once, which related to former British prime ministers, Gladstone and Disraeli, who are competitors, and great statespeople of in Britain's history. And they said the difference between the two of them were that if you went out for dinner with Gladstone, you'd come out of that dinner saying, oh my goodness, I just had dinner with the smartest guy in the world. He's so impressive. I'm kind of overwhelmed by it. Like, it's just unbelievable. You go out for dinner with Disraeli and you come back and you say, boy, I just had this lovely dinner with this fella. He made me feel like the smartest guy in the world, right? And so I hope that we'd have that ability like Disraeli to make young people, but also the adults in our community, feel good about themselves. But coming at that from a deliberate standpoint. I'd hope that we'd have kind of a gregarious element of kind of happiness and joy, like a John Candy kind of character, right? Like a really fun interpersonal strength. I also hope, though, that we'd be seen as having a great sense of ambition and the ability to deliver things at a high level. So, whether it's a fellow I knew over the years who passed away about 1.5 years ago, for whom I had a huge amount of time, was Michael Wilson, the former Minister of Finance, and I think a lovely, lovely person who was active in mental health and did so much for his community. But he was someone who achieved great things at an astounding level and was a class act, who was as committed to his family and his community as it was at doing well. So some kind of blend of those people with maybe the talent of Stevie Nicks or something, right? Or of Aretha Franklin, the great Aretha Franklin, right? So who makes other people feel wonderful around them. So some mashup of all those things. Oakville is very proud of the fact they call themselves a town. And I think we're very fortunate. We see ourselves, I think educational institutions, again, whether they're public or private, must see themselves having a sense of public purpose in what they do. Right? I mean, great education institutions must do that. And we see ourselves very much of the Oakville community, but also Halton and the Western GTA. So, so many of our service programs work with local agencies, whether it's Kerr Street Ministries or United Way, or we have, hundreds of kids engaged in local activities. It's not just fundraising, but local activities day to day. And that's a big part of it. We try to make our campus open for neighbors on a respectful basis. We have become the host of many different community activities, whether it's fundraisers or things like that. So we see ourselves not only about the 800 students who are here, but we see ourselves as being a resource broadly painted for our community. And I think I'd say my relations with our political leaders here, municipally, but also provincially and federally, have been really positive. And I think they see the benefits of a place like Appleby, and we obviously see our commitment to not just helping our students, but society, which is what Edmund Walker and John Guest envisioned for the place. I have three pieces of advice. Number one is they should start early. I had a call yesterday from someone asking whether we were full, and I said, we've been full for about 4 months now for next year. So, our deadline for applications is the end of October, and I think other schools have different deadlines, but it happens earlier than often many families think about. Number two, and I'm sure you hear this from everyone, is the question of fit. And I talked earlier about sometimes people are way too focused on sidewalk appeal. So what does the facility look like? Yeah, that's important because it can help things like what programs you're able to offer. But what's far more important is the culture question. So if you and your child are able to talk to current students, to faculty members, and delve beyond, whether you have this team or this subject or this course, to talking about the relationship piece, I think getting a sense of the culture and what it's like, is it a really competitive place? Is it a really welcoming place with not a lot of challenge? Those are the things that I think in the long term will be most important. Last thing I'll say is obviously getting a chance to visit, and during COVID, that's been tough. But when you add a place, you get a vibe for it. I also think there's so many great schools out there. In some ways, the most important thing is the child, and because we started grade 7, we're not talking about JK kids, is the child central to that decision? Because if they're invested in the decision, if they feel they own some of that decision, then their chance of being fully committed and being successful goes way, way up. If it's many kind of high-end schools have a challenge where parents are pushing their kids in a certain direction. The kids have to be really interested in that as well. So those would be a few points of advice.
For more information about this school, you can visit their profile at ourkids.net.